Imagine you wake up tomorrow morning and check the news. Your phone explodes with alerts. Oil prices, $200 per barrel. Stock markets crashing across Asia, Europe, and the United States. Cargo ships stuck in the Persian Gulf. And one headline dominates everything. Iran announces closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, here's the strange part. You might not live anywhere near the Middle East. You might be thousands of miles away. But suddenly, your life starts changing. Gas stations run dry. Airline tickets double overnight. Food prices surge. Factories slow down. Shipping routes collapse. Why? Because a narrow strip of water, only 33 kilometers wide, suddenly became the most important place on Earth, the Strait of Hormuz. Every single day, nearly 21 billion barrels of oil pass through this tiny maritime choke point. That's about 1/5 of the world's total oil consumption. Now, imagine that flow suddenly stopped. Not slows down, not disrupted, stopped. Global energy markets would panic, governments would mobilize, navies would mobilize. And the question everyone would ask is simple. Can Iran actually do it? Can one country truly choke the global oil supply? Would the United States intervene? Would China stay neutral? Would this trigger the largest economic shock since the 1973 oil crisis? And, most importantly, what happens to the world if the Strait of Hormuz closes? Because the truth is far more complicated and far more dangerous than most people realize.
To understand why the Strait of Hormuz matters so much, you need to look at a map. The strait sits between Iran to the north and Oman and the United Arab Emirates to the south. At its narrowest point, it's only 33 kilometers wide, but the actual shipping lanes are much smaller. 2 channels, each only about 3 kilometers wide. One for ships entering, one for ships leaving. That's it. And through those narrow lanes flows the economic lifeblood of the modern world. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, about 21 million barrels of oil per day pass through the strait. That's roughly 20% of global petroleum consumption, 1/3 of global seaborne oil trade, most of the oil exported by Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, and the UAE. Let's run the numbers. Saudi Arabia exports about 7 million barrels per day. Iraq exports around 3.5 million. The UAE adds another 3 million, and Qatar ships about 77 million tons of liquefied natural gas every year through the same passage. In other words, the global economy depends on this tiny bottleneck. But here's the twist. The world has almost seen the Strait of Hormuz shut down before, multiple times. It's 1984. The Iran-Iraq War has already been raging for 4 brutal years. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers are dead. Neither side can win. So both governments decide to attack something else: oil. Specifically, the oil tankers carrying energy through the Persian Gulf. This phase of the conflict became known as the Tanker War. Between 1984 and 1988, more than 450 commercial ships were attacked. Missiles, naval mines, airstrikes, insurance premiums for ships entering the Gulf skyrocketed. Oil markets panicked, and the global economy started feeling the pressure. But here's where the situation escalated. Iran began deploying naval mines in the Strait of Hormuz. Cheap weapons, but incredibly effective. In 1988, the USS Navy frigate USS Samuel B. Roberts struck one of these mines. The explosion nearly sank the ship. 10 American sailors were injured. The United States responded immediately. Operation Praying Mantis, the largest U.S. naval battle since World War II. American forces destroyed Iranian oil platforms, sank several Iranian warships, and crippled much of Iran's navy in just one day. Message delivered. The Strait of Hormuz reopened, but the lesson was clear. Iran didn't need a giant navy to threaten global oil supplies, just mines, missiles, and geography. And that lesson shaped Iran's military strategy for the next 40 years. But the real danger came later.
because Iran began preparing for something much bigger. Let's talk about military math. The United States spends about $900 billion per year on defense. Iran spends roughly $25 billion. On paper, this looks like a mismatch, but Iran knows it cannot defeat the United States in a conventional war, so it designed something different: asymmetric warfare. Instead of matching U.S. power ship for ship, Iran built tools specifically designed to disrupt the Strait of Hormuz. Let's break them down. First, naval mines. Iran is believed to possess between 2,000 and 5,000 naval mines. Many of them cost less than $10,000 each. Clearing them, that can take months, and each mine can destroy a $100 million oil tanker. Second, fast attack boats. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy operates hundreds of small, high-speed boats armed with rockets and torpedoes. Think of them as maritime swarms. Instead of large warships, Iran uses dozens of small vessels attacking simultaneously. Third, anti-ship missiles. Iran possesses several missile systems capable of targeting ships in the Gulf. Some estimates suggest ranges of 300 kilometers or more. Fourth, submarines. Iran operates several diesel-electric submarines, including the Russian-built Kilo class, perfect for laying mines and launching torpedoes in shallow waters. Put it all together, and you get something military strategists call area denial. Iran may not defeat the U.S. Navy, but it might be able to make the Strait of Hormuz too dangerous to cross, and if that happens, oil markets explode. But wait, because the world actually got a glimpse of this scenario recently. It's June 2019. Two oil tankers suddenly explode near the Strait of Hormuz, one Norwegian, one Japanese. Massive fires erupt. The United States quickly blames Iran. Iran denies everything. But that's not the real story, because within weeks, 6 more tankers are attacked. Global shipping companies panic. Insurance costs surge by 300%. Oil prices spike, and suddenly every country realizes something terrifying. The Strait of Hormuz doesn't need to be fully closed to cause chaos, just threatened. Even limited attacks can scare shipping companies away, which means oil stops moving, which means prices skyrocket. And this is where the economic dominoes begin to fall.
Let's do the math. Global oil consumption today sits around 102 million barrels per day. The Strait of Hormuz carries 21 million. If that flow stops, the world instantly loses 20% of its oil supply. Now here's the problem. Oil markets cannot easily replace that. Even the largest producers, the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Russia, cannot ramp production that quickly. Strategic petroleum reserves might help. The United States has about 350 million barrels remaining in its reserves, but at global consumption levels, that covers just a few days of lost supply. So what happens next? Prices explode. During the 1973 oil crisis, oil prices quadrupled. If Hormuz closes, analysts at JP Morgan estimate oil could reach $150 to $250 per barrel. That means gas prices triple, air travel becomes expensive, shipping costs soar, and inflation surges worldwide. But the economic shock doesn't stop there.
Some countries depend heavily on Gulf oil. China imports about 45% of its crude oil from the Middle East. India imports around 60%. Japan and South Korea rely even more heavily. If the strait closes, these economies face immediate energy shortages. Factories slow down. Electricity prices spike. Economic growth collapses. Now compare that to the United States. America now produces around 13 million barrels per day. Thanks to the shale revolution, the U.S. is less dependent on Middle Eastern oil than ever before. But global markets still matter. Even American drivers would feel the shock. And here's the kicker. China cannot easily replace Middle Eastern oil, which means the Strait of Hormuz is not just an economic choke point, it's a geopolitical pressure point.
If Iran actually closes the strait, the United States would almost certainly respond. The U.S. Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain, patrols the Persian Gulf specifically to keep shipping lanes open, and the United States maintains several major military bases nearby. The U.S. Navy also operates the world's largest mine-clearing fleet. But clearing mines is slow, painfully slow. During the 1991 Gulf War, clearing just a few dozen Iraqi mines took weeks. Iran could deploy hundreds. So even with military intervention, the strait might remain disrupted for months. And every day it stays closed, the global economy bleeds. But this brings us to the moment everyone fears, the breaking point.
Imagine this scenario. Tensions between Iran and the West escalate rapidly. Sanctions intensify. Iran's oil exports drop close to zero. The Iranian government decides it has nothing left to lose. Within hours, naval mines appear in the Strait of Hormuz. Missiles target commercial tankers. Fast attack boats swarm shipping lanes. Insurance companies immediately suspend coverage. Oil tankers stop entering the Gulf. Oil supply drops by 20 million barrels per day overnight. Oil prices spike past $200 per barrel. Global stock markets crash. Airlines cancel flights. Governments release emergency oil reserves. Meanwhile, the U.S. Navy launches a massive operation to reopen the strait. Carrier strike groups arrive. Mine-clearing ships deploy. Airstrikes target Iranian missile batteries. But even if the United States eventually restores shipping, the damage is done. The world has just experienced the largest energy shock in modern history, and everyone now understands something terrifying. The global economy depends on a single narrow waterway.
Now, before you sit back and laugh and say that would never happen, look around. Tensions in the Middle East remain high. Iran continues developing new missile systems. Global oil demand remains over 100 million barrels per day, and the Strait of Hormuz still carries roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply. This is what economists call a systemic vulnerability, like a crack in the foundation of a skyscraper. Most days, nothing happens. But if pressure builds, everything collapses. This is the canary in the coal mine for global energy security. And that's why countries are racing to build alternative pipelines and shipping routes. Saudi Arabia has already expanded pipelines to the Red Sea. The UAE built a pipeline bypassing Hormuz entirely, but those alternatives only handle a fraction of Gulf exports, which means the choke point remains. For now.
So what does this teach us? 3 big lessons. First, geography still controls global power. Technology changes, economies evolve, but a narrow strip of water can still hold the world hostage. Second, energy security equals national security. Countries that depend too heavily on imported energy remain vulnerable. That's why we're seeing massive investments in renewables, nuclear power, and domestic production. Third, the biggest risks in global economics are often hidden in plain sight. Everyone knows the Strait of Hormuz exists, but few people realize how fragile the system really is.
So here's the question I want you to think about. What happens the next time a geopolitical crisis erupts in the Persian Gulf? Because history tells us something important. Conflicts rarely start with the intention of triggering global crises. They escalate, slowly, then suddenly, and when they do, the Strait of Hormuz becomes the most important place on Earth.